Once again, a very good afternoon now. We're just about 1 hour, 25 minutes late, not too bad. But we'll try to see if we can do a bit catch up as far as timing is concerned. Unfortunately, 2 of our panel members are not here. So probably we will be able to do some catching up as well. The theme for this is largely around this hypothesis, I would use the word, which is, are there 2 Indias, the India and the Bharat? And I still maintain a hypothesis because I certainly have a view that I think it is an artificially created segregation. Convergence of aspirations have already happened a long time ago. Convergence of purchasing power is beginning to take place now. It will happen there. Digital economy does not see the barriers between a small town and village and big cities. So maybe this hypothesis itself about India and Bharat has to be really looked into, but that's my opening comments on the theme itself. What I did do was to take the liberty of posing a few questions to each of our panel members. Hopefully they have been able to give some time to it. And that might give different perspectives on what we're talking about, the consumer and retail, but in the context of divergence or convergence, both in aspirations as well as actual behavior on the ground when it comes to buying. So let me start with you, Shailesh. You're the boss here. You have set up the event. You would have gone through the physical, the India and Bharat story. What are the current major differences between the so-called India and Bharat? And what are the strong similarities, if any? Let's start with today, not what might happen X years from now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Arvind, I think in fashion retail especially, I'm seeing convergence of demand tastes across the world, not just in what we call India versus Bharat. Convergence is a big force. So what one sees in London, what one sees in Bombay or one sees in Kolhapur, for example, there is a large trend of similar things getting consumed. And we believe in industry that convergence is a big force. Give you a simple example. I was in Jaipur, and Jaipur is not a small town by any stretch of imagination, but I'm giving a story which comes from Jaipur. So I have an old aunt, she is 75 years old, and when a year back I took over the new responsibility with many more brands than just Tommy CK. So I was telling her, I was talking to her saying, okay, now I run US Polo also and I run Flying Machine also. Then she said, you don't run Supreme? Now, see, Supreme is a brand which is, very cool, young, sort of, fits are very oversized and very unique, brand. And I was completely taken back by, she had no sense. She wouldn't even know Flying Machine. I mean, forget Supreme. So I said, Prema Ji, my bua, I said, why you're asking about Supreme to me? So I said, what happens is that the place she lives, there are a lot of these fake products being sold. And by chance, she would have seen a lot of fakes of Supreme in that part of Jaipur. There is a white color Supreme with red color Supreme written on that, and she figured that out, that there's something called Supreme. She had no clue what it meant, etc. But somewhere at the back of her mind, in her own world in Jaipur, she figured out there's something called Supreme, and she was disappointed that I was not going to run Supreme. So I'm giving a small example of a brand like Supreme being sort of quoted by my 75 years old aunt, and because see what's happening is that what creates demand is getting converging, it's converging. So everybody, see, in the past, in fashion industry, we used to stay up night to watch Oscars, okay? Because for us, it was important to see what Armani is designing for, let's say, George Clooney. And we used to, really get up late at night and early morning and watch what are the trends, what everybody is watching, etc. Today, I mean, every day what George Clooney is wearing is known to a young girl or a guy in a small town of Bharat, right? It's available. The influencing is there for everybody to get influence, and everybody is then buying the same. I'm not giving a classical example of Apple phone, which everybody uses, or those are expected conversion,
so
but I'm saying...
So we all agree that look, as far as awareness is concerned and aspiration is concerned, probably I think there is sufficient evidence to show that between the urban centers as well as suburban and large villages, at least if I may say so, there is some convergence. What could be the significant differences if you can highlight?
That's even more important, Arvind,
Yeah.
and I was coming to that, see, one thing I see a difference when we sell in a town in our list of, let's say, top 150 and smaller town after that, the importance of wedding. It's a very unique differentiation. So in metro, people buy for wedding, their weddings happen. Delhi, the famous, the whole roads get choked when those 500 weddings happen or 1,000 happen. But the importance of wedding is there, but it's not to the extent the way the wedding consumption happens in small town. In small town, when the wedding dates happen and the wedding calendar is there, we have to be there that time with the right amount of stock. Somehow, wedding is a very, very critical consumption event in a small town, and that sort of is a little different. Second difference is that in smaller town, the importance of a retailer, the local retailer is very, very highlighted, and his ability to influence consumption is very high. So, I'm giving example of Agra, again, not a small town, but let's say Bachumal Agra or Jitubai sitting here in many parts, Rajkot, not a small town again, but much smaller town. The importance of that local retailer and the trust the rich people or the normal customers have is much more pronounced than you see in Bombay. Bombay, I don't see now a large multi-brand retailer existing. It's only now national department store chain, EBOs, malls have taken over the entire consumption. There's hardly any local neighborhood big retailer left, which used to be there 30 years back, but they've all lost out in that. And there's no this special relationship that a retailer has. So to coming to the short summary of differences, I would say the wedding, the importance of local retailer to influence your consumption. Some of these things are, little different than in the big cities.
Perfect, because this is what Damodar also said a short while ago, that look, we should not be following the concept of seasons. We are driven still largely by occasions in our life. So weddings, festivals are the ones where we have to build our offer around. And I think if we do that, which I'm sure Reliance is doing and many others are doing too, it'll be a more successful way to go to the market. Damodar, so while you obviously talked about some of those 5 or 6 small towns or villages in southern India, but I was very glad you talked about Haldwani. I used to study in St. Joseph's, Nainital years ago. I know Haldwani very, very well. I have a home near Ranikhet. I also know Ramnagar. Just to mention as an aside, for last 14, 15 years, I've been going there very regularly. There's a small village called Bhatroj Khan near my place. Most people do not know, but I mean, when you talk about Bharat part, the Bhatroj Khan would qualify more as Bharat than a Rajkot or a Jaipur or a Agra might do. I was pleasantly surprised 6 months ago, there's a pizzeria and a coffee shop. In a village, there might be 1,000 households, not even 1,000. It's so small. So we stopped once and asked. He said, "नहीं, बहुत लोग जाते हैं यहाँ से." This chap was laid off during COVID, went from a big city, and opened up a pizzeria and a cafe. And he's now thinking about delivering to our place, which is 7 kilometers. Now, this is to me a real sign of convergence there. Urbanization happening in a very interesting manner of people going back from big cities to small cities and smaller places. And then even bringing those concepts from big cities much quicker than actually the big retailers might do. What has been your experience now over the next 4 or 5 years? Do we see acceleration of this behavior, or will it be the same pace we have seen in the last few?
So we talk about digital access democratization. Yeah, that happened, and we know amongst the world leaders we are in terms of digital access democratization. The other bit that happened, which is a very favorable thing from our point of view, looking back, is the jhijak, the hesitancy of using digital more and more got demolished during COVID. The most hesitant, most reluctant digital users came on board into the habit, and then the whole world opens up. Then the whole world of peer-to-peer word of mouth, of the kind of example that we spoke about, is you don't need the service provider or a brand to fire aspirations. Aspirations are actually the young girl in Davangere will know what is the latest top or the color going around in Whitefield in Bangalore because her cousin just posts it without the involvement of any service provider, just because this new word of mouth is digitally powered. So I see this going even further. And hopefully more and more of us are getting the access part, the supply part, right to reach out to where the aspirations are and where the demand is. For me, personally, in my business, actually, the smaller the town, the more interesting it is. Because in the suburbs of Mumbai or in the suburbs of Delhi, the richest advocate or the IAS officer or the biggest doctor or the largest businessman does not shop at my stores. But in Churu, everybody is fine. So I get to therefore see really premium consumption happening, happening there. And well, I talk about it like wisdom, but that's not how it happened. We saw the sales mix in towns like this that I mentioned, and we said, who is bathing with comfort fabric softener? And where is all this green tea going from our stores in these tier 3 and tier 4 towns? And then we went around to check, and it is that the aspiration and the demand existed. The supply actually happened when these homes visited the nearby larger cities.
Yeah.
And they grabbed these markers of well-being, if I can say, markers of everyday well-being, and brought them to their homes in smaller towns. As we get the Supply Act right, these will become habits. These will not become occasional purchases when they travel to Bangalore or when they travel to Chennai, but they will become everyday, regular things. So both on the aspiration and the fulfillment side, I see this being pumped up even more and more now. Because both sides, the consumer was ahead of us, let's be honest, of all of us service providers in the Indian journey of modern retail. But both digital and physical modern retail is catching up, and this will be a symbiotic force.
Yeah, and I can only just mention, although we are not talking so much as food here, I think there is even a more remarkable convergence taking place beyond fashion now in what we eat and how we eat. For me, my moment of discovery about this was about 4 or 5 years ago. Again, in my one of the visits to my home, Upar, we stopped at a small town called Ramnagar, more famous for Corbett than anything else. I had forgotten some grocery from Delhi, went to a local grocer. I got whatever I wanted. Then I saw in the display racks, peanut butter. And I was curious. I could not help asking him, Ramnagar mein peanut butter? It was my ignorance, let's put it this way. He said, "Sab bikta hai, 6-8 bottles nikal jati hai per day." Per day. This is Ramnagar, which most people, again, like, you can't recognize where it is unless you say it is Corbett. Or वहाँ पे local communities, not the restaurants, other which are buying it. So individuals who are living in the town, peanut butter. So I think this is also one more sign that, look, the divergence is not so much as we make it out. Convergence is happening much quicker. It's across all categories of products. It's not only limited to fashion, which is more easy visually, but even in terms of taste and eating. India still consumes 60% of their disposable income as far as merchandise spending is concerned, is on food. So for me, that's the biggest change there. To a youngster in our group, Bharat, you said like you were not born in 91, right? You were just about, maybe you were crawling or something, just learning to walk. So a simple, straightforward question for you. What is the future of consumer brands in India? Now, more importantly, we know the brands are important. To me, the more exciting part is all the new brands which are emerging. You are a house of brands, you look into brands as Thrasio and others. Would we see far more challenging and challenger brands now than we have seen in the past?
Hi. That's a loaded question. If I could know what the future of consumer brands is, that'd be fantastic. But I'll tell you from our experience, we've run a consumer brand, a challenger consumer brand for the last 5 or 6 years. There is no question that challenger brands will challenge the large brands, right? I think that's a given. but that doesn't really mean they'll win. I think consumer brands, challenger brands will innovate on behalf of the customer. It'll be new products, it'll be peanut butter, it'll be new price points. They'll always do that. Some will succeed, some will not. I think the large brands still have the dominance, but they'll have to be agile. The world is new, they'll have to think on their feet, they'll have to listen to the customer a lot more. Fabric softeners in tier 3s, peanut butter, all of that, the large brands will have to stay ahead of. And just more generally speaking, large brands haven't been very agile historically, and that's where I think the challenger brands are going to challenge. And there are a number of reasons why they have the ability to do this now, like our brand, for example. First is distribution. It was hard, expensive to set up distribution a few years back. Now with Reliance, with Flipkart, Amazon, Udaan, all of these, you can get to new households. So it's given sort of a level playing field to at least get in front of the customer. We heard 60% of search or discovery was happening online. So it gives us, or challenger brands, at least an opportunity to get in front of the customer. But you really have to get into why the customer is converting to challenger brands to understand why I personally think that they will really challenge the large brands, right? Shailesh talked about the influencer, which is a retailer. You go to a retail shop, retailer used to say, ये बिकेगा, ये नहीं बिकेगा, ये अच्छा price है, ये इसमें complaint आता है, right? He was the real influencer always. Now that's suddenly changing, right? There is user-generated content. There is no divide on information. Tier 3 person is looking at the same Instagram, same Facebook as a tier 1 person. Reviews have become so much more important, ratings, reviews. So the purchase is really, really democratic, right? For a 500 rupee purchase, I open 5 tabs. I spend an hour making that purchase. People spend 3 hours making that purchase. अब ना कोई शर्म नहीं है to buy the cheapest product, and that's what challenger brands are understanding. That's what challenger brands are going after, and that's really the change in purchase behavior that challenger brands are really seeing and going after.
Can you give an example which would fall in the genre of a David and a Goliath story? You know, a David and a Goliath story, you know, historically, I mean, a challenger brand which has actually come out and taken on a massive national brand and is only making some impact. Any example from your portfolio of brands?
Multiple actually, and I would use the popular ones for a large forum.
Just give one example.
Boat headphones is a great example, right? A great story where market was dominated by large brands. They came in, quirky products, slightly improved products, better rating, better reviews, and went ahead and you know, are the biggest audio brand in the country today. And it'll happen with small brands. Like peanut butter is a great example, right? And these challenger brands will figure out if you like crunchy, if you like smooth. Data will show that, and they will come out with products that are more suited to the Indian palate faster. And it's for large brands to keep up with that pace to continue to challenge. And there's one last thing which is slightly controversial, but I think brands are, the mode that big brands had is weakening, right? With all of the user-generated content, as you go into deeper Bharat markets, the strength that brand gave you is slightly going down. Like people will do research, people will read reviews, people will read ratings, people will compare. And that, I think, is really opening up the possibility for small brands like ours and the brands we are acquiring to go up and go challenge against your Philips, or Bajaj, or an Usha. And that's actually really speeding up the conversion on smaller brands. And I think demographic, everybody talked about. India is younger, more purchase power, and younger people are more experimental. They give you a chance. Thanks to Reliance and Flipkart, they have return policies which encourage that behavior. So I think the future is for challenger brands to come in and challenge the large brands. And I think in 10 years, you'll see a lot of industries where the challengers of today will be the large brands of tomorrow.
I agree with you, by the way, fully, that we will see there's so much energy, enthusiasm, creativity in India. And with some of the challenges of distribution and the supply chain getting sorted out by third parties, it gives a chance to go to market to so many others who never had a chance earlier, despite having a good product. So I support what you're saying. Coming to you, Dave, you know, this question about, you know, it bugs me like many other things. India is a very price-sensitive market and blah, 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 whatever else. To me, it's a function of the money which you have, like Shailesh also talked about, per capita. When you have little money, you have to be very careful with where you spend. So a better term is to see India as a value-driven market. And you have seen, I have seen, the definition of value has changed over the last 30 years. Today, what you might think, because lifestyle, my perception still landmark, by and large, is value retailer, not a deep discounter. What would you define as value today, and what you might see as a definition changing, if at all, for value in 10 years from now?
I think with the economy growing, and if we assume a 7% growth every year, and really the per capita income growing from, say, the current levels of $1,800 to maybe $3,000, $3,500, I think in the next 5 to 6 years, what can really change is, and we are observing some green shoots of it already, because consumers are moving from buying a category or a commodity. Today, if you go to a small town, I want a pair of jeans. I want something to cover myself, right? From a very basic need to something that's more inspiring, something that's more aspirational. So we are seeing a lot of commodity category moving into branded business. That's number one. Number two, for us to make this happen, I think all of us, and it's just not the brands, it's also the entire ecosystem. There is the brands, of course, like us, then the real estate, mall developers. We have to really create the shopping experience in these markets. Today, bulk of the shopping experience is concentrated in metro cities. The 5, 6 metros have the best malls, have the best shopping experiences. You go 2 levels down, you actually don't have any experience in these markets. So what has happened there is, because the experience is not there, it's become a category, right? Because there is no experience in these markets. And because there is no experience, brands are thinking twice to go to these markets. But it's not that the consumers are not buying these brands. E-com has bought brands to these consumers. I think there is a huge play when retail develops. Retail development happens in these markets. Then brands will be able to deliver experience to consumers, and therefore the entire uptake will happen. I think that movement is going to happen from a commodity to branded play. That's one. The second big change we see, and we're already seeing now, is I think our definition of fashion. We think metro is very high fashion, so give the assortment to metro. Where you go to tier 2, tier 3, give the core and the basics. I think that's completely unfounded. We've opened a couple of stores in tier 2 markets. Our assortment hasn't changed. Our ASP has not changed significantly. Of course, there is a 2-3% drop in ASP. ASP, no big change. Bill value, no big change. The SPD and the SPFs have maintained. So in all probability, the tier 2 is virtually behaving like a metro, which says that technically there is no big difference between a tier 2 and a tier 1, the way we imagine in our minds. So these are eye-openers. Of course, we've just launched a few stores. When we open maybe much larger stores and more towns, maybe the experience will be different. But we wouldn't be surprised if we get similar productivity even in the tier 2 markets.
Absolutely right. And again, last time I'm going to give an example of my journey from Delhi to Richi village, where my home is. So many years ago, I was very surprised to see in this town called Kashipur, which comes also on the way, a Tanishq store. And then again, it shows my ignorance. Tanishq and Titan are very smart company and people. I could not have imagined that a slightly more stylized jeweler, and jewelry is purchased to a point which Shailesh was making there, is very influential by the local jeweler, much more than any other category I know of. To open a franchise of Tanishq there and actually do well, and it's still there. So it means that it has performed, that's why it is there for those 5, 6 years. It only shows that we have only artificially created this tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which I've never figured out what exactly is the meaning of this. Is it population? Is it what? But at least consumer-wise, looks like the behavior, there's more convergence than divergence. Coming now to Ramesh, Wingreens, I know personally the startup of Wingreens, privileged for that. You have been a category creator of sorts. It's a niche category, but I think it's a very aspirational, very interesting, very well-loved category. Wingreens, for people who are not very familiar, started with exotic, very nice, very high-quality dips, very aggressive in sampling, like I had seen it in the US when I used to study a long time ago, to make people try the product. And in a way, slightly for more affluent homes in Delhi, at least I can speak for, Wingreen dip is the dip to offer when you're actually entertaining at home. All great stories. In the context of smaller part of India or rural India, have you seen any such desire emerging and volumes emerging for Wingreens, or do you have any plans to launch a new brand or something? And whatever is strategic to you, obviously, if you don't expect to share that with you, but what has been your experience of this very interesting category which you are in?
So over the last year or so, and thanks to COVID actually, we've sort of transformed from being just a dips and sauces company to a collective of brands. And why did we make this transformation from being a dips and sauces company to a collective of brands? We realized that in the last 2 years, there's this convergence that's happening across the country. People require these brands, and a lot of these startups were struggling to go beyond 0 to 1. Right? They all easily moved from 0 to 1, became 3-4 crore companies, and after that they didn't know what to do because they didn't have a distribution footprint or the capability to go beyond where they were to this next town and the next town and the next town. So what we've done over the last year is acquire 4-5 of such brands, like-minded brands. So there is Wingreens Dips, but we bought Raw Pressery. Raw Pressery was a fabulous brand, very successful in metros, but struggling to go beyond that, and I think brought it on board. Today it has quadrupled in the last 3 months or 6 months. Right? Similarly, we bought a Coimbatore-based brand called Monsoon Harvest. Again, struggling, only online, didn't know where to go, brought it on board, and now we are expanding that distribution. So what are we trying to build? It's almost like what Thrasio does for Amazon or Mensa brand does for Amazon. We are trying to build a pipe for the market for like-minded brands that need to go to the market but are unable to scale up. So we bought another brand called Sorcery in Bombay. Bought the last brand that we acquired was a regional snacks brand called Postcard, which has a Jamnagari Chida, a Kovalpatti Chikki, Himachali Chana, and all of these brands, but they don't have any capability to go beyond what they are. I mean, they can sell as much as they can on Amazon and beyond that. So really to bring that convergence to fruition and make people in rural areas or not rural, maybe even small towns, consume the brands which are great quality but actually can't get there is really what our mission is. Create a pipe that can take like-minded, fresh, minimally processed brands to as many consumers as possible. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years, not just taking dips beyond Gurgaon or South Bombay, but really trying to take many such brands across into the pipe. And that's where the real struggle is for any startup brand. There are few examples like Boat and Capital Foods and so on, but there are many more of as passionate entrepreneurs who have not been able to scale up and therefore died. And in this PE world, it's even more difficult because you get the first round and the angel and the A and the B is very easy. After that, if you don't scale up, nobody's going to give
stops.
you. And it stops and then you die.
Yeah.
Right? So who's going to help you go to the next stage? And that's really where we are hoping to create a company which can actually make that bridge between startup and being a scale FMCG company.
But from a consumer perspective, you don't see any resistance of any kind that this brand is only South Mumbai or South Delhi or Gurgaon.
Actually, the resistance is not from consumers, and I'm sorry to say this in this panel, but the resistance from retailers.
Okay.
Because retailers believe that only this brand will go to this place. We opened in, Lulu opened in Trivandrum, for example. And Trivandrum is not on high priority list for any brand, right? But in Trivandrum, Raw Pressery actually sells more in Trivandrum than it sells in, say, Chennai or, markets like that. So consumers are there, consumers are ready to consume, but there is a gatekeeper. And it's not the senior management of retail, it's actually the guy at the bottom who's the gatekeeper saying, the buyer or the guy who's saying, no, I'll send it to my South Bombay store, but I will not send it to my Borivali store, or I will not send it to my, Namakkal store, or I will not send it to my, Ranikhet store. So that's really the gatekeeper, and that's really where we hope to make a difference in making retailers believe that we have a brand that can actually bridge this Bharat and India divide that is being artificially created by most people.
So again, I think reinforcement of the fact that many of the challenges and limitations and boundaries we have set are actually internally created by us. The market and the consumer haven't really set those limits for us. Yep. I think consistent theme since the morning. Abhishek, So, slightly differently, I think one of the very big enabler for experiential marketing, if I may say so, is availability of good quality retail space. So while Pacific has gone to relatively smaller cities, Dehradun is just one example, it's not so small, but still there. Do you think something is going to change in the next 10 years? Because that to me remains to be one of the biggest bottlenecks for actually taking good brands to smaller cities and providing the kind of aspirations that consumers have. So what is your thought on the change?
I think to look at the next 10 years, we should look at the last 20 years, and that will give us some learning on how the retail real estate market has progressed.
Yeah.
And if you look at the first malls in 2000 and the first two centers in Gurgaon and how they shaped up, and then in 2010 onwards, in the last decade or half a decade, we actually realized what good shopping centers meant, what good shopping environments meant. Back in the day, there were starter-sold malls, bad designs, or India mein design hote the, and that's how those malls were built. So what the developers have learned over the last half a decade or maybe a decade is what is going to pave the way for the next 10 years to come. Funding was not so easy back in the day, whereas now we see that a lot of foreign capital has come into the real estate segment, and rightly so, because they're getting the returns. Deals are happening. Most of the quality retail assets are now held by foreign institutional investors, and which are backing for further growth. So the manner in which the retail developments will take place will be very, very organized and very different from what had happened in the last 20 years. Also because we have seen, and there are a number of examples now in, so to say, tier 2 or tier 3 cities, which were not there in 2000, 2005 or 2010. Retailers as well as developers have realized the strength of these smaller towns where the SSPD is probably equal, if not just maybe 10 or 15% lower than a lot of metro cities. So with that confidence now, when we are going out and doing these retail centers in smaller cities, it just changes the game altogether. Also because of the fact that we are coming in with the confidence of the retailer with us. Also, back in the day, we did not have the number of retailers. If we wanted to do a 500,000 square feet shopping center 15 years ago, there were not that many retailers, or a good size of a shop was 1,000 square feet. Agar kisi ko brand डालना है, 1,000 foot is tops. अब तो salon बनता है 3,000 square foot का, 4,000 square foot का, experience center बनता है 5,000 square foot का. पहले तो कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता था, 500, 600, 700 square foot में salon बन जाता था. So, those things have changed, and the consumption of our areas have changed. Now, when all of this is happening, what does a developer need to do? Now, once all of this has happened, and I am the owner of that shopping center now, perpetually, I understand that I have to manage this asset on my own. So we internally developed this program called service per square foot. Instead of just a rent per square foot, we started a service per square foot, wherein we say that for the rent that we are charging, we should not call it the rent for the per square foot area that the retailer has taken from us, but what is the service that as a developer we are going to provide once the retailer has opened shop in our mall and is running the business. So we are developing that program. So I think the learnings that have come, the money that has flown in, and the total confidence that the retail industry has given in totality is paving the way for the next 10 years on how shopping malls will be developed, either in metro cities, on tier or tier 1, 2 or 3 cities, however you want to call it.
Just a simple state question. India has about 800 districts, give or take a few. Leave aside 100 which are extreme border districts or otherwise. Even if you look at the 700 districts, leave aside the metros also. At the very least, each one of them deserves to have at least one modern shopping center, whether it is 100,000 feet or 200,000 or 500, doesn't matter. And by that definition, we need some competition as well. So we need 1,000 plus at least. Against this gap, I would say the current gap, over the next 10 years, how many do you think, realistically speaking, might come up?
So real estate is a very global and a local business, especially in India. अब ये जो भारत और इंडिया का डिवाइड है ये उसके अंदर आ जाता है. If I am operating as a real estate operator in one region successfully does not mean that I will go towards the other end of the country and be as successful. So there have to be local developers coming out from every region. I don't see a lot of those malls being developed. That divide 10 साल में नहीं पूरा हो सकता.
Okay.
It cannot be done in 10 years for the sheer fact that the amount of money coming in and the number of people who are there to build are not enough.
Yeah, so then there's a risk, and then I'll have a couple of questions from the audience before we wrap the session up. The risk is like this, what has happened in the US and elsewhere. A lot of shopping centers, consumers have moved on, digital, experiential, and others. You spend more time shutting them down or repurposing them rather than building it. Do you think there's a risk like that in India that by the time we catch up with the number of malls which are required, the consumers have moved on?
Consumers will move on to where?
No. For a different concept, so experiential part, F&B part, what Pushpa talked about, happening places. But for shopping as retailing,
I always say this in each conference that I attend, that online has been the biggest boon to brick and mortar retail.
Right.
If that was the thought process कि shopping center से move on करके ये online retail पे move on कर जाएंगे या किसी और भी platform पे, I just don't see that happening because today when somebody in Haldwani, for example, wants to buy a Tommy t-shirt, वो online order करके मंगा लेगा. But when he comes to Delhi, he will say, पापा मेरे को Tommy के store पे जाना है because I want to experience that. That will never change. वो human need है, वो change नहीं होगा. So somebody who's a fan of that brand will look for that outlet and will go there.
Okay. Thank you so much, all the panelists. Now let's have a couple of questions from the audience before we wrap up. I can't see against the lights. If somebody can stand, at least I can make out if there is a question. If there are no questions, thank you very much, ladies. Yeah, okay, lady, please.
Okay, I have one question.
Okay. Half a question. Yeah.
My name is Preeti. Am I audible?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Preeti, and it's very, very heartening to hear the discussion by such eminent panelists here. However, it's very nice to know that you're talking about this great divide between Bharat and India. I represent a mall which is in Greater Noida, and it's extremely challenging to have the retailers come there and open store. And it's very contradictory to what we've just discussed in the discussion right now. And this is open to everybody, whoever can hear me, that, I really, whatever you've been talking about here makes a lot of sense, but somehow I don't see it being translated on field. And I would really love to reach out to whoever is here and, have better synergies. So just wanted to put this across.
So maybe instead of a question, you can actually take hold of one of the panelists, and maybe the person can answer you a little bit more detail. It's not a simple answer to your question there. So thank you so very much, audience. Thank you so very much again, Anish, Amitabh, and the team. I enjoyed being here. I hope it was worth your while to be here for this session at least. Thank you.
Thank you.